In the heart of a bustling city, a prestigious academy is led by its ambitious principal, Marcus Hale. Known for his charismatic leadership and dedication to education, Marcus harbors a dark secret, a passionate affair with Lila Monroe, a vibrant and talented art teacher at the school. Unbeknownst to Marcus, Lila is pregnant with their child, a fact that threatens to unravel his carefully constructed life. Marcus had built a reputation as a man of influence. As the head of a prestigious academic institution, he was admired for his leadership and dedication, projecting an image of success and stability. He had a wife, two children, and a life most would envy. Yet, beneath that carefully maintained facade, Marcus carried a burden, a deep dissatisfaction with the world he had created for himself. For years, he had played the part of the devoted husband and father, managing his responsibilities with precision. His wife, Tara Hale, was well regarded in their community, active in charitable work, and a strong presence in their social circles. Together, they appeared to have it all. But Marcus had grown restless. The routine of his life, the endless meetings, events, and parental obligations had started to wear him down. He found himself longing for something more, something beyond the rigid structure of his existence. That's when Lila entered his life. She had joined the staff as an art teacher, bringing with her a kind of energy Marcus hadn't seen in a long time. She was young, talented, and passionate about her work, quickly becoming popular among the students. Her enthusiasm stood out against the otherwise serious tone of the institution. Marcus first noticed her during a faculty meeting, where her views on creativity and education challenged the more conservative approaches of the school. It was this spark, this willingness to break the mold, that caught his attention. At first, their interactions were professional, limited to brief conversations after meetings or in passing. But as the weeks went by, Marcus found reasons to stop by her classroom more often. Their talks became longer, moving from casual exchanges about work to deeper discussions about life. Marcus confided in her about the pressures he felt, the weight of his responsibilities, and the cracks that were beginning to show in his personal life. Lila listened, understanding in a way that others in his world never had. Lila, too, was drawn to Marcus, though she hadn't expected to be. Having just started her career, she was eager to make a name for herself in the school. Her love for art was evident in everything she did, and she approached teaching with a passion that made her students see the world differently. But outside of her professional life, Lila had been searching for something more. She had moved through a string of short-lived relationships, none of which had provided the connection she was craving. Marcus, with his confidence and authority, seemed to offer what she had been missing. What began as an innocent rapport soon evolved into something neither of them could ignore. Marcus would linger after hours, stopping by her classroom with no real reason other than to see her. They would talk for hours about their lives, sharing secrets they hadn't told anyone else. The attraction between them grew quietly at first, masked by the excuse of work, but it quickly became undeniable. Their affair began one evening after a school event. It was late, the building nearly empty, and Marcus had offered Lila a ride home. In the quiet of the car, the tension between them became impossible to ignore. What followed was the first step into a relationship that would change both of their lives forever. It wasn't just the physical connection, it was the feeling of being seen, understood, and desired in a way neither had experienced in years. For Marcus, the affair was an escape from the relentless demands of his life. He convinced himself it was harmless, just a way to take the edge off the stress he constantly faced. It wasn't that he didn't love his family, he did. But with Lila, he felt a sense of freedom he hadn't known in a long time. She represented a world outside his responsibilities, a place where he could be someone other than the man everyone expected him to be. Lila, however, saw things differently. To her, the affair wasn't just a fleeting distraction. She had fallen in love with Marcus, believing what they shared was real and lasting. She knew he was married and had a family, but she allowed herself to hope for a future with him. She envisioned a life where they could be together, away from the secrecy and the lies. But as their relationship deepened, so did the complications. Marcus had no intention of leaving his wife. He had built too much: his career, his family, his public image on the foundation of that life, and he wasn't willing to sacrifice it. The affair to him was always meant to be separate, something that wouldn't interfere with the rest of his world. Lila's growing expectations were a problem he hadn't anticipated, and the more she expressed her hopes for their future, the more distant Marcus became. The turning point came when Lila discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for weeks, but the confirmation left her feeling both excited and terrified. She believed this would be the moment that changed everything, that Marcus would finally decide to be with her. But when she told him, his reaction was far from what she had hoped. Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him as she spoke. His mind raced through the implications: the destruction this news could bring to his life, the consequences that could unravel everything he had worked so hard to build. He tried to stay calm, but inside he was panicking. This wasn't part of the plan. Lila, seeing his hesitation, tried to reassure him, thinking he just needed time to process the news. She was certain that once the shock wore off, they could figure it out together. But Marcus's thoughts were already spiraling in a different direction. This wasn't just an affair anymore. It was a threat to his entire existence, and he couldn't afford to let it destroy him. The revelation of Lila's pregnancy shattered the illusion Marcus had carefully maintained. What had been a temporary escape from his life had now become a problem threatening to destroy everything. He couldn't ignore it, and he certainly couldn't allow it to unravel the life he had built with Tara and his children. Lila, meanwhile, was hopeful, believing this would be the turning point, the moment Marcus would finally choose her. But she was wrong. Marcus's mind churned, constantly trying to figure out a way to keep his secret buried. He knew there was only one solution. Lila had to get rid of the baby. His initial conversations with her were calm, even rational, as he tried to convince her that a child would complicate their lives beyond repair. Lila, however, stood firm. She wanted the baby and believed they could find a way to make it work. She spoke of love, of their future together, but Marcus couldn't listen. All he saw was his perfect life slipping through his fingers. The situation spiraled further when Lila refused to go along with his plan. Marcus grew desperate, watching helplessly as the walls began closing in. His anxiety turned to frustration, quickly transformed into anger. He needed a way out, and he needed it fast. That's when he reached out to Derek Mason. Derek had been Marcus's friend since childhood. Though they had once been close, life had taken them down very different paths. Derek, who had struggled with jobs and relationships, now worked as a private investigator, though not a very successful one. He had fallen on hard times, and Marcus knew that well. Desperate for money, Derek was vulnerable to any opportunity that promised quick cash. Marcus approached Derek under the guise of needing help with a delicate matter. He didn't tell him everything at first, instead framing the situation as a problem with a former lover who was threatening to ruin his life. Marcus made it clear he needed this problem to go away, and that's when he proposed the idea of Derek intimidating Lila into an abortion. It wasn't outright violence Marcus was asking for, but enough pressure to make her fear the consequences if she didn't comply. At first, Derek hesitated. The idea of getting involved in something so personal and potentially illegal didn't sit well with him. But Marcus knew how to push his buttons. He offered Derek money he couldn't refuse, dangling the promise of more work in the future. Derek agreed, albeit reluctantly, to approach Lila and convince her to reconsider her decision. When Derek first met Lila, it wasn't what he had expected. He had envisioned someone manipulative, someone using the pregnancy to trap Marcus. But Lila was nothing like that. She was honest, vulnerable, and clearly in love with Marcus. The more Derek spoke with her, the more he realized she wasn't a threat. She was just a woman trying to navigate an impossible situation. His loyalty to Marcus began to waver, replaced by a growing empathy for Lila. As Derek continued his attempts to intimidate her, he found himself pulling back, unable to follow through with Marcus's demands. Lila's determination and the depth of her emotions affected him more than he expected. She wasn't trying to destroy Marcus's life. She just wanted a future for her child, one that Marcus seemed determined to deny. Derek became conflicted, trapped between his loyalty to Marcus and his newfound concern for Lila. Meanwhile, Marcus's frustration only deepened. He demanded constant updates from Derek, pressuring him to act more quickly. His panic was growing and the fear of exposure gnawed at him. Marcus began to distance himself from Lila, avoiding her calls and offering weak excuses for why he couldn't meet. When Lila confronted him, the cracks in his composed facade became visible. The loving, supportive man she had known was now cold and calculating. Feeling trapped, Marcus decided to take control. His conversations with Derek grew more urgent, his instructions darker. He began hinting at more drastic solutions, though never explicitly stating them. Derek, recognizing the dangerous path Marcus was treading, tried to push back, insisting there had to be another way. But Marcus had already reached a point of no return. He saw only one solution. Lila had to be silenced. By this point, Derek was in too deep, and the guilt weighed heavily on him. He had gone from reluctantly agreeing to intimidate Lila to becoming a pawn in Marcus's darker plans. Torn between his old loyalty to Marcus and his conscience, Derek made a choice. He went to Lila and confessed everything. He revealed Marcus's plans, admitting how far things had spiraled. Shocked and terrified, Lila realized that the man she had once loved had become a danger to her and her unborn child. Derek urged Lila to leave the city and disappear before Marcus could act. But Lila, heartbroken and betrayed, refused to run. She was determined to confront Marcus and demand the truth. Derek knew it was a dangerous gamble, but he couldn't stop her. What neither of them realized was that Marcus had already made up his mind, and their confrontation would not go the way Lila had hoped. Lila's decision to face Marcus marked the beginning of the end. The woman who once believed in love and promises now saw the cold reality of who Marcus had become. No longer dealing with the man she had fallen for, she was now up against someone desperate, dangerous, and willing to do whatever it took to protect his carefully built life. Despite her fear, Lila felt a surge of resolve. She would not be silenced, and she would not let Marcus dictate the future of her child. Meanwhile, Derek's growing guilt left him conflicted. He could no longer ignore how deep he had sunk into Marcus's schemes. He had already betrayed Lila once by agreeing to Marcus's demands, and now he was determined not to repeat the same mistake. He knew Marcus was spiraling out of control, and the situation was on the verge of something irreversible. When Lila finally confronted Marcus, it wasn't with anger or hysteria, but quiet determination. She laid everything out, demanding to know why he had turned on her so quickly, and why he was willing to destroy the life they had created. Marcus, cornered, reacted with cold detachment. He tried to mask his panic with control, rationalizing his actions. He told her she had left him no choice, believing he needed to protect his family, career, and everything he had built. To him, Lila had become a threat, an obstacle that had to be removed. The conversation shifted as Lila realized the depth of Marcus's deception. She saw through his words, recognizing he had never planned to leave his wife or build a life with her. He had used her, and now that she carried his child, she was nothing more than a problem he needed to eliminate. Marcus, scrambling to maintain control, tried to spin the narrative, but his carefully crafted mask was crumbling. In his desperation to keep his secret intact, he revealed a darker side of himself that Lila could no longer deny. The tension between them escalated rapidly. Marcus, unable to manipulate or charm his way out, became aggressive. It wasn't the violence itself that shook Lila, but the cold indifference in his eyes. She fought back, driven by an instinct to protect her unborn child. In that moment, she understood that Marcus was beyond redemption. He had made his choice, and there was no reasoning with him anymore. Marcus's world collapsed in an instant, but not before a final, desperate act. When Lila confronted him, she expected anger or denial, but not what came next. In a moment of fear and panic, Marcus reached for a hidden object, something he had never planned to use, and aimed it at Lila. The tension snapped as a sharp sound echoed through the air, sending Lila crumpling to the ground. The impact hit her in the abdomen, leaving her struggling for breath as pain overtook her body. She collapsed, clutching her stomach, the fabric of her shirt quickly soaking in red. Marcus stood frozen, the weight of his actions slowly dawning on him. But even as the reality of the situation settled in, he made no move to help, his hands trembling as he stood over her. Derek arrived just moments later, horrified by the scene before him. Lila lay on the ground, fading fast, while Marcus stood in shock. Derek's heart sank as he rushed to her side, filled with guilt and anger for his role in this mess. He tried to stop the bleeding, his hands trembling as he applied pressure to the wound, but he could see that she was slipping away. Marcus, his senses slowly returning, dropped the weapon and attempted to flee. The thought of facing the consequences terrified him, but Derek, fueled by guilt and determination, couldn't let him escape. He tackled Marcus before he could get far. They struggled briefly, but Marcus, consumed by panic, soon gave in. Derek held him down until the authorities arrived. The paramedics worked swiftly, rushing Lila to the hospital. She was unconscious, and her condition was critical. The trauma had been severe, and the medical team fought to save her life. Meanwhile, Marcus was taken into custody, the gravity of what he had done sinking in. Regret was useless now. His once carefully maintained life had crumbled, leaving only the consequences to face. As the trial neared, the community struggled to comprehend Marcus's dramatic fall from grace. Once a respected figure, he was now at the center of a scandal no one could have foreseen. His wife, Tara, filed for divorce and moved away with their children, desperate to leave the wreckage of her husband's actions behind. In court, the evidence against Marcus was overwhelming. He was charged with murder and related offenses. His defense argued that he had been pushed to the edge, claiming temporary insanity, but the prosecution laid out a stark narrative. Marcus had manipulated and controlled those around him, ultimately deciding to eliminate Lila when she threatened his carefully built facade. Derek took the stand, confessing to his involvement in Marcus's earlier schemes. His remorse was evident. While his actions had contributed to the events leading to Lila's death, his decision to stop Marcus before he could escape helped his case. The court showed leniency in his sentencing, acknowledging his cooperation, though Derek knew the weight of guilt would follow him forever. Tragically, despite the paramedics' efforts, Lila could not survive her injuries. Marcus was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His former life, once defined by status and success, had disintegrated. Redemption was beyond reach. His choices had sealed his fate, leaving him to live out the rest of his days in the shadow of his unforgivable actions.